Hi, everyone. It is Friday, and we're going to read the next two chapters. And I just posted a question on the live chat. Many of you yesterday said you've seen the movie, so don't spoil it for everyone. But so far, from what we've read, what's the same about the movie and the book, and what's different? What are you noticing as, oh, that wasn't in the movie that you're hearing from the book? So put it in the live chat. Let me know what you think is the same and what is different. And then we'll get started reading. Today's chapter is Mr. Willy Wonka. So we're going to learn about Mr. Willy Wonka himself. Mr. Willy Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gates of the factory. And what an extraordinary little man he was. He had a black top hat on his head. He wore a tailcoat made of beautiful plum-colored velvet. His trousers were bottle green, and his gloves were pearly gray. And in one hand, he carried a fine gold-top walking cane. Covering his chin, there was a small, neat, pointed black beard, a goatee. And his eyes were the most marvelously bright. They seemed to be sparkling and twinkling at you all the time. The whole face, in fact, was alight with fun and laughter. And oh, how clever he looked! How quick and sharp and full of life! He kept making quick, jerky little movements with his head, cocking it this way and that way, taking everything in with those bright, twinkling eyes. He was like a squirrel in the quickness of his movements, like a clever, quick old squirrel in the park. Suddenly, he did a funny little skipping dance in the snow, and he spread his arms wide, and he smiled at the 5 children who were clustered near the gate. And he called out, "Welcome, my little friends! Welcome to the factory!" His voice was high and fluty. "Will you please come forward at one time, please?" he called out, "and bring your parents. Then show me your golden ticket and give me your name. Who's first?" The big fat boy stepped up. "I'm Augustus Glump," he said. "Augustus!" cried Mr. Willy Wonka, seizing his hand and pumping it up and down with terrific force. "My dear boy, how good to see you. Delighted, charmed, overjoyed to have you with us. And these are your parents? How nice. Come in, come in. That's right." Next girl to go forward is Veruca Salt. "My dear Veruca, how do you do? What a pleasure this is. You do have an interesting name, don't you? I always thought that a verruca was a sort of wart that you got on the sole of your foot. But I must be wrong, mustn't I? How pretty you look in that lovely mink coat. I'm so glad you could come. Dear me, this is going to be such an exciting day. I do hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. I know you will. Your father? How are you, Mr. Salt? And Mrs. Salt? Overjoyed to see you. Yes, the ticket is quite in order. Please go in." The next 2 children, Violet Beauregard and Mike TV, came forward to have their tickets examined and then to have their arms practically pumped off the shoulders by the energetic Mr. Wonka. And last of all, a small, nervous voice whispered, "Charlie Bucket?" "Charlie!" cried Mr. Wonka. "Well, well, well. So there you are. You're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, aren't you?" "Yes, yes. I read all about it in this morning's paper." "Just in time, my dear boy. I'm so glad. So happy for you. And this? Your grandfather?" "Delighted to meet you, sir. Overjoyed, enraptured, enchanted." "All right, excellent. Is everybody ready now? 5 children? Yes, good. Now, Will you please follow me? Our tour is about to begin. But do keep together. Please don't wander off by yourselves. I shouldn't like to lose any of you at this stage of the proceedings. Oh, dear me, no. Charlie glanced back over his shoulder and saw the great iron gate entrance slowly closing behind him. The crowds on the outside were still pushing and shouting. Charlie took one last look at them. Then, as the gates closed with a clang, all sight of the outside world disappeared. Here we are, cried Mr. Wonka, trotting along in front of the group. Through this big red door, please. That's right. It's nice and warm inside. I have to keep it warm inside the factory workers because of the factory workers. My workers are used to an extremely hot climate. They can't stand the cold. They'd perish if they went outdoors in this weather. They'd freeze to death. But who are these workers? Asked Augustus Gloop. All in good time, my dear boy, said Mr. Wonka, smiling at Augustus. Be patient. You shall see everything as we go along. Are you all inside? Good, good. Would you mind closing the door? Thank you. Charlie Bucket found himself standing in a long corridor that stretched away in front of him as far as he could see. The corridor was so wide that a car could easily have been driven along it. The walls were pale pink. The lighting was soft and pleasant. How lovely and warm, whispered Charlie. I know, and what a marvelous smell, answered Grandpa Joe, taking a long, deep sniff. All the most wonderful smells in the whole world seemed to be mixed up in the air around them. The smell of roasting coffee and burnt sugar and melting chocolate and mints and violets and crushed hazelnuts and apple blossom and caramel and lemon peel. And far away in the distance, from the heart of the great factory, came a muffled roar of energy, as though some monstrous, gigantic machine were spinning its wheels at breakneck speed. Now this, my dear children, said Wonka, raising his voice above the noise, this is the main corridor. Will you please hang your coats and hats on the pegs over there and then follow me? That's the way. Good. Everybody ready? Come on then. Here we go. He trotted off rapidly down the corridor with the tails of his plumes flapping behind him. And all the visitors hurried after him. It was quite a large party of people when you came to think of it. There were 9 grown-ups, 5 children, 14 in all. So you can imagine that there was a good deal of pushing and shoving as they hustled and bustled down the passage, trying to keep up with the swift little figure in front of them. Come on, cried Wonka. Get a move on, please. We'll never get round it today if you dawdle like this. Soon he turned right off the main corridor into another slightly narrower passage. Then he turned left, then left again, then right, then left, then right, then right, then right, then left. The place was like a gigantic rabbit warren with passages leading this way and that in every direction. Don't let go of my hand, Charlie, whispered Grandpa Joe. Notice how all these passages are sloping downward, called out Mr. Wonka. We are now going underground. All the most important rooms in my factory are deep down below the surface. Why is that? Somebody asked. There wouldn't be nearly enough space for them up on top, answered Mr. Wonka. These rooms we are going to see are enormous. They're larger than football fields. No building in the world would be big enough to house them. But down here, underneath the ground, I've got all the space I want. There is no limit. so long as I hollow it out. Mr. Wonka turned right. He turned left. He turned right again. The passages were sloping steeper and steeper downhill now. Then suddenly, Mr. Wonka stopped. In front of him, there was a shiny metal door. The party crowded round. On the door, in large letters, it said, "The Chocolate Room." That's the end of that chapter, Mr. Wonka. The next chapter is called The Chocolate Room, and this will be our last chapter for today. The Chocolate Room. An important room, this, cried Mr. Wonka, taking a bunch of keys from his pocket and slipping one into the keyhole of the door. This is the nerve center of the whole factory, the heart of the whole business, and so beautiful. I insist upon my rooms being beautiful. I can't abide ugliness in factories. In we go then. But do be careful, my dear children. Don't lose your heads. Don't get overexcited. Keep very calm. Mr. Wonka opened the door. 5 children and 9 grown-ups pushed their ways in, and oh, what an amazing sight now met their eyes. They were looking down upon a lovely valley. There were green meadows on either side of the valley. And so there's a picture here that you can see. See the chocolate room? And along the bottom of the valley, there flowed a great brown river. What's in this river? What is more, there was a tremendous waterfall halfway along the river, a steep cliff over which the water curled and rolled in a solid sheet, and then went crashing into a boiling, churning whirlpool of froth and spray. Below the waterfall, and this was the most astonishing sight of all, a whole mass of enormous glass pipes were dangling down into the river from somewhere high up in the ceiling. They really were enormous, those pipes. There must have been a dozen of them at least. And they were sucking up the brownish muddy water from the river and carrying it away to goodness knows where. And because they were made of glass, you could see the liquid flowing and bubbling along inside them above the noise of the waterfall. And you could hear the never-ending sucking sound of the pipes as they did their work. Graceful trees and bushes were growing along the riverbanks. Weeping willows and alders and tall clumps of rhododendrons with their pink and red and mauve blossoms. In the meadows, there were thousands of buttercups. "There!" cried Mr. Wonka, dancing up and down and pointing his gold-topped cane at the great brown river. "It's all chocolate. Every drop of that river is hot, melted chocolate of the finest quality, the very finest quality. There's enough chocolate in there to fill every bathtub in the entire country. And all the swimming pools as well. Isn't that terrific? And just look at my pipes. They suck up the chocolate and carry it away to all the other rooms in the factory where it is needed. Thousands of gallons an hour, my dear children. Thousands and thousands of gallons." The children and their parents were too flabbergasted to speak. They were staggered. They were dumbfounded. They were bewildered and dazzled. They were completely bowled over by the hugeness of the whole thing. They simply stood and stared. "The waterfall is most important," Mr. Wonka went on. "It mixes the chocolate. It churns it up. It pounds it and beats it. It makes it light and frothy. No other factory in the whole world mixes its chocolates by waterfall. But It's the only way to do it properly. The only way. And do you like my trees? He cried, pointing with his stick. And my lovely bushes. Don't you think they look pretty? And of course, they are all eatable, all made of something delicious and different. And do you like my meadows? Do you like my grass and my buttercups? The grass you are standing on, my dear ones, is made of a new kind of soft, minty sugar that I've just invented. I call it swudge. Try a blade. Please do. It's delectable. Automatically, everybody bent down and picked up a small blade of grass. Everybody, that is, except Augustus Gloop, who took a big handful. And Violet Beauregard, before tasting her blade of grass, took the piece of world record breaking gum out of her mouth and stuck it behind her ear. Isn't it wonderful? Whispered Charlie. Hasn't it got a wonderful taste, Grandpa? I could eat a whole field, said Grandpa Joe, grinning with delight. I could go around on all fours like a cow and eat every blade of grass in the field. Try Buttercup, cried Mr. Wonka. They're even nicer. Suddenly, the air was filled with screams of excitement. The screams came from Veruca Salt. She was pointing frantically to the other side of the river. Look over there, she screamed. What is it? He's moving. He's walking. It's a little person. It's a little man down there below the waterfall. Everybody stopped picking buttercups and stared across the river. She's right, Grandpa, cried Charlie. It is a little man. Can you see him? I see him, Charlie, said Grandpa Joe excitedly. And now everybody started shouting at once. There's two of them. My gosh, so there is. There's more than two. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are they doing? Where do they come from? Who are they? Children and parents alike rushed down to the edge of the river to get a closer look. Aren't they fantastic? No higher than my knee. Look at their funny long hair. The tiny men, they were no larger than a medium-sized doll, had stopped what they were doing, and now they were staring back across the river at the visitors. One of them pointed towards the children, and then he whispered something to the other. And all 5 of them burst into peals of laughter. But they can't be real people, Charlie said. Of course they're real people, Mr. Wonka answered. They're Oompa Loompas. And that's the end of the chapter. Monday, we'll pick it up and we'll learn more about the Oompa Loompas. Have a great weekend, everyone. Hope you enjoyed. Please add to the live chat. Tell me what's the same and what is different between what you've seen in the movie and what you're hearing in the book. Make sure you don't spoil anything, only what has already been read. All right. Bye, everyone.